Hey guys, welcome back to another great game of CDH. Today we have another short match. Although to be fair, every game with Slicer in it generally makes the games go pretty quickly. And I'm always amazed how well Slicer does at a CDH table. Also, have you heard the news? Your favorite CDH YouTube channel has released some cool merch. And if you're interested in picking up some sweet new apparel, come check us out. Also, if you like what you see, consider joining our Patreon, as with your help, we can keep producing the videos you enjoy. And if you want to play with us, hop on our Discord. We have an ever-growing community that loves to talk MTG or whatever else strikes our fancy. And we would love to meet new people. Alright, block there, kill that. Oh, that is trample. Guess I'm just dead on board. Starting us off, we have Arthur and Morophon. And while that commander doesn't tell you much, this is actually a hidden elf ball deck. It aims to make infinite mana with Dockside, and with the power of all the colors in the world, can win in a variety of ways. He also utilizes Morophon as a backup, cost reducer, and a big beefy boy. Next up is Gavin, playing 11 Chief Hopper, Clue Farm. Similar to Blue Farm, this is a fast combo deck that also gains access to an infinite turns combo with Time Cedh. And while it can generally win pretty quickly, it also can rely on both its commanders to gain value and carry him through a prolonged struggle. In the third spot, we have Ethan playing Tymna Kraum, otherwise known as Blue Farm. This list mainly focuses on a quickly assembling win cons with one-card enablers such as Ad Naus or Intuition. The deck puts a heavy emphasis on Ad Nauseam, Underworld Breach, and Dockside Extortionist Flickers. It utilizes a lot of fast mana to power out either explosive wins or strong early card advantage engines, such as Kraum or Rhystic Study. It usually seeks to be the fastest deck of the table, but has the potential to grind when needed. And bringing up the rear, we have MTG Loots on Slicer. This is a mono-red Voltron stax list. Man, is that a pain to say. This deck aims for an early Slicer since his backside is just too cheap. And with the addition of haste, he can get an early hit in and really start the pain. It uses a combination of stax pieces to slow your opponents down and an equipment package to give you some needed card advantage. As with Slicer, even if your opponents control it, you control the equipment. So that handy Sword of Fire and Ice deals 4 damage and draws you 2 cards. And with Slicer having the ability to attack 4 times each go-around, the game will definitely end quickly if no one has an answer. But without further ado, let's get on to the gameplay. Also, before we begin, both Lutz and Ethan mull to 5. Arthur starts off the game with a taiga. Gavin plays 2 life to get probe Ethan. He looks at Ethan's 5-card hand and draws. He then plays and cracks a Scalding Tarn to find a volcanic island. He does shortcut as he casts a Soul Ring and ends his turn with the Follower Stone. Ethan has a Bloodstained Mire, which he fetches out for a Badlands, and uses it on a turn 1 Monkey. Lutz also has a turn 1 Urza Saga and a Soul Ring. He then casts a Mox Opal and cries about not having Metalcraft.
Yes, no Slicer turn 1. Thank God, thank God.
No.
You're safe.
Arthur plays a Bayou and a Sylvan Library. Gavin cracks a Polluted Delta and grabs a Scrubland, ending his turn with his commander, Chief Jim Hopper. Ethan starts off with combat. He sends his monkey at Arthur, who takes the hit and exiles the Survival of the Fittest off the top of his library. He gains his treasure and plays a Volcanic Island. He then taps 2 for an Arcane Signet and uses it and his treasure to cast the Exiled Survival. Lutz untaps and gets another lore counter. He has a Bloodstained Mire as land and cracks it for a basic mountain. 3 mana then gets Lutz the backside of his Slicer. And moving to combat, he sends the vehicle at Ethan, who takes the hit and Lutz ends his turn transforming it. Arthur untaps and gains Slicer. He Sylvans but doesn't take any extras and heads right to combat, sending Slicer at Ethan, who takes 6 more Slicer. Then on his second main, Arthur plays a Savannah and passes. Gavin gains Slicer and plays a Mana Conflicts as land. 3 mana then gets him a Ranger Captain, who on ETB finds him an Esper Sentinel. He casts the Sentinel and then heads to combat. He sends both the Chief and Slicer at Arthur, who takes 10, with Gavin investigating twice. Ethan gains Slicer and heads to combat. He sends Slicer at Gavin, with Ragavan heading at Arthur. There are no blocks, and Arthur exiles Amarowin, the Nurturer. On his second main, he plays and cracks a Windswept Heath for a Tundra, shortcutting to cast his commander Kraum,
which blocks this horrid creature that you have.
True.
And then I will... It does trade with it, but it's better than dying to commander damage, so...
With Arthur at his end step, Aladamri's calling. He gives a card to Gavin and finds a dockside. Lutz draws and floats a mana before sacrificing his Urza Saga to find a commander's play to the battlefield. He goes to equip, and Arthur makes a deal with Lutz to not swing at him this turn. And in return, he won't Nature's Claim his commander.
Oh boy. It's going to be impossible to deal with the commander's play on. It's going to have protection from everything.
It's not my problem.
Okay.
The equip is good, and Lutz then plays a Wasteland as land, tapping 2 for a Torpor Orb, as a more juicy target than Slicer. He does give a card to Gavin, and then Lutz then moves to combat and sends Slicer at Gavin, who wishes he could have blocked the Sentinel. But due to protection, he instead takes 12 Slicer, with Arthur at his end step Nature's claiming the orb and giving a card to Gavin. Arthur gains Slicer and Sylvans. He takes 4 to keep an extra card and heads to combat. He sends the suited up commander at Ethan, who can't block Slicer and actually dies. Although Arthur probably should have cast his dockside first, as he lost out on 2 more treasures. But on his second main, he plays a Cavern of Souls and names Elf, following that up with his tutored Goblin, with the only response being Gavin cracking a clue and Arthur getting 6 treasures and then casting an uncounterable Morophon, naming Elf on ETB. Gavin gains Slicer and plays a Mox Diamond, discarding a command tower. He cracks another clue and chalks in a Watery Grave, taking 2. He then sends Slicer at Arthur, who chumps with Dockside, with Gavin passing after that. Lutz plays another mountain as land and casts a Professional Facebreaker. He then moves to combat, and before declaring attackers, Gavin casts a Fire Covenant, although he is promptly reminded that the robot has protection from black.
Oh man, brutal.
Right.
What are we supposed to do?
I don't know, but it's pretty sick.
I will swing in at Morophon.
Arthur then takes the hit, and Lutz gains 2 treasures due to Double Strike. Lutz then sacks a treasure to exile a Gemstone Caverns. He's already played a land and sacrifices another treasure to exile a Mana Vault, which he casts, ending his turn there. Arthur untaps and gains Slicer. He takes 8 to keep 2 extra cards from his Sylvan and plays a Reflecting Pool. 5 mana then gets him a Chulane, but Lutz responds with the Pyroblast to stop whatever shenanigans Arthur was trying for. Arthur then has to head to combat and sends Slicer at Gavin, which takes him out. And not having an answer, Arthur then scoops it up as he's just dead on the backswing, giving the game to Lutz. Game review. Well dang, I totally forgot how good Commander's Plate can be. Although it also reminded me just how broken Urza's Saga is as well. Although I think the defining play was Arthur choosing to remove the Torpor Orb instead of Slicer. And to be fair, since he was holding the dockside, I thought he was going to combo off. But maybe he did misplay and need those extra treasures to combo off. But it looks like that gave the game to Slicer. Knowing Slicer, it probably would have been better to slow Lutz down, as one thing this deck can struggle with is Slicer removal. And by that point, everyone did have a blocker, so having Slicer cast on his backside really doesn't do anything. As for the other players, I think the Mold of 5 hurt Ethan, and while the monkey was helping, it didn't find him anything useful. I am definitely curious what Gavin's plan was, as he did have all that fast acceleration, although it looks like the clues just were a bit too slow to find him some removal. But thanks to all the players, and I'll catch you guys later.